This week, Keith is in the land down under, so I'm joined by April Wright. We're going to be discussing a jQuery plugin that's been exploited for years, finally getting patched. A remote code implementation flaw found in Medtronic cardiac programmers, hackers hiding in cryptocurrency, malware in Adobe Flash updates, and the government is finally rolling out two-factor authentication for federal agency domains. And Disney is helping women from across their company to become developers. As I said, special co-host is April Wright joining me today, so stay tuned for all that and more on this episode of Application Security Weekly. This is a Security Weekly production. Layered Insight is the industry's first embedded security approach for containers. Trusted by Global 1000 enterprises to secure their containerized applications, it's the only solution that requires no root privileges, has zero dependency on the underlying infrastructure, and is fully portable across any container environment. Unify DevOps and SecOps, enabling the rapid development of containerized applications without worrying about security. To learn more, please visit layeredinsight.com/ASW. Rapid7 powers the practice of SecOps. Using shared data, analytics, and automated workflows, SecOps unites IT, DevOps, and security teams to make security an outcome of innovation. Rapid7 combines technology, expertise, and advocacy to drive vulnerability management, application security, incident detection, and log management for more than 7,000 organizations worldwide. Power up your SecOps practice with a free trial at rapid7.com/securityweekly. What's up, everyone? Welcome to episode 36 of Application Security Weekly for October 22nd, 2018. I am not your host, Keith Hoodlet. I am, in fact, your host, Paul Asadorian, joined remotely by none other than April Wright. April, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks. Great to be back.
Yes, nice to have you. So I have someone to talk to, and I'm lucky it's someone as fabulous as you, April. So this is going to be a lot of fun, as usual. We're trouble when we get together on the show, too. I was thinking about that earlier when Sam told me that you're the co-host today. I'm like, oh, this is trouble. Did you have a good time at DerbyCon? Last time I saw you was, in fact, at DerbyCon.
Oh, it was great. Yeah, it was a really good DerbyCon. It was a little weird in the new venue, but yeah, overall it was excellent.
Now, did you give a presentation?
I did. I gave a training and a presentation.
Oh, that's right. That's right. That's awesome. So you were busy while you were out there.
I was.
And busy having fun, too. I think I saw you one of those more fun moments where I was like, I'm going to go back to my room now. And then I walk across the lobby. I'm like, nope, I'm going to stay and chat for a while and go to bed much later than I should.
LobbyCon was in full effect.
It was.
At both hotels.
It was awesome. It was awesome. Just a quick announcement before we get into it. Join us for our webcast with Signal Sciences titled Which Way You Should Shift Testing in the SDLC. The webcast will be held on November 8th from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time. And really all you need to know, it's going to be me, Larry Pesci, and Zane Lackey. And then just for that reason, to have those two folks and myself all together is going to be a really interesting webcast and good dynamic. So securityweekly.com/Signal Sciences and register today. I really thought in April, in the bugs, breaches, and more section, as we go through these first three, that these brought up all kinds of potential topics for conversation between us. And the first is the jQuery plugin that's been exploited for years is finally getting patched. And I don't know if you had a chance to read this article or you had your kind of take on it.
Yeah. This was kind of, I mean, not surprising. So anytime you rely on a third-party piece of code, you're going to have to rely on their patching as well. Are you more secure if you develop your own jQuery type thing? Probably not, even though this was pretty big and out there. The funny thing about it was that it wasn't actually a problem with jQuery per se. It was more of a change that Apache made that made it so that jQuery became the vulnerable avenue for attack.
Yeah, so that was interesting. So was it Apache changed something that made uploads not work, but the workaround was to use jQuery where uploads still worked? That was the part that was weird to me.
Yeah, it was htaccess permissions, basically. I mean, it seemed like something really small, but it turned into something really big, and I think that's really one of the problems when we have, you know, complex systems, is that you never know how things are going to work together. You never know how things are going to break when other things change. This was the theory behind when we had gosh, what are they called? When we had like boxes that would just appliances. People would put appliances, and the appliances would have everything you needed in a certain configuration that you needed, and they'd be really hard to upgrade. So an appliance would have fixed this, maybe.
Maybe so many of those.
But they probably would have updated anyway and had no idea that it happened.
Exactly. Yeah. You know, I think it's interesting. They say in the article that the plugin is the second most starred jQuery project on GitHub after the jQuery framework itself, and talk about how jQuery is used all over the place. It's been forked 7,800 times and is used by the popular CMSs and CRMs, including WordPress, Drupal, and Joomla, as its PHP is the back end. And we were talking about this before, and it's interesting, like just the history of vulnerabilities with those particular platforms, and then PHP underneath it. I mean, PHP file upload vulnerabilities are used as basically a testing ground when you're first learning application security. It's like one of the first things you do is put up a vulnerable PHP app and exploit the file upload capability, because I mean, in most cases that is a stepping stone to lots of other vulnerabilities as well, including, you know, remote code execution, file inclusion, all of those other vulnerabilities. And here we still are today, and this is stuff we did, you know, potentially 20 years ago, and here we are today, and this same technology is still being used, and that's really scary for me that we haven't really worked to replace some of this technology with something more updated.
Well, I mean, Apache has been around as long as I can remember, and it's a pretty mature product. It's actually, it's funny because GitHub runs jQuery itself.
Yes.
Yes, and they said that they weren't affected, but they patched anyway, just to be safe. But yeah, I mean, Apache's been around forever, and to think that a small change like that would have such a big impact down the chain of software that relies on it. Yeah, I don't know if anybody could have foreseen this or even tried. Yeah, but what's crazy to me is that this has been around for like 3 years. How have we not seen this in logs? How have we not seen this happening in like Blue Team? How has nobody found out about this until today?
Yeah, and the article says they can go back to a YouTube videos that are dated August 2015. Like, how did we miss that? How did we not find that YouTube video? Right? That was my first thought too. Like, how did we miss this? I don't know. In what I kind of think about, you know, speaking of like, it's just been so much time and we're using the same technology and having all these problems. And there's so many much newer frameworks that I feel can provide a much better level of security. And I haven't researched it personally. I'm curious to hear from our listeners. Like, are there replacements for WordPress that are built on technologies that are more reliable and they're easier to secure, right? In all these new hipster languages. I feel like jQuery was a hipster language, but now it's not, right?
Well, I know that there are replacements that are like commercial, but you're going to have the same open source versus commercial argument where do more eyes on the code make it more secure versus proprietary code. So it's all about like what you feel comfortable with. If you're going to run the most popular software on the internet, like WordPress or whatever, you're going to find that you're going to be attacked more than if you're running the third most popular.
Yeah.
So
no, it's true.
Yeah, just having security by by unpopularity.
Yeah. Yeah, well, the WordPress is interesting because it's almost like the open source model, and the ease of which I can add on to WordPress is the thing that hurts it the most from security. Because now you've lowered the bar to publish a plugin or an extension or whatever, and now all of this code is out there, and it's all. I mean, most WordPress plugins have some level of vulnerability in them. And there's been tons of studies done on WordPress plugins. So much so that it's not even worth discussing anymore, because so many people have done, the independent research, because it's all out there and open. Yet I don't see it getting much better, to be honest.
I think they would have to do something that was similar to the Apple Store model. So having vetted apps, having limited use. I don't know. They'd have to completely rework the framework for having plugins in WordPress, because just being community driven means that you're going to get code from all over the place, and it's not vetted by anybody necessarily.
Yeah, and I tend to not lean towards commercial plugins and not some of the open source ones, although that's not a very good strategy on the surface, right? I mean, my thinking is, well, that maybe they'll pay more attention to it because people are paying for it, and they don't want to have a vulnerability because they might lose customers, which in a small shop, I mean, that could be the case in a crowded market, but that doesn't guarantee anything, right?
Right.
There are some guarantees that you're vulnerable if you're running libSSH of a specific version, which I thought was really, really interesting. And another one that I think has been out there for some time, and I was struggling to understand this one, but they basically posted a tweet that makes it very easily understandable. And basically someone put on Twitter that was like, holy shit. He's like, I don't know much about this protocol, but if I understand it correctly, you can just claim, yeah, I'm logged in and no need to verify, and it'll work. And the reply was, yeah, basically, that's it.
That's exactly it. It's just like any bad coding on a website where you have a variable that's like off equals 1.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's basically what you're doing with SSH. It's pretty, but it's only with the server. It's not with the client. So if you're not running the server, then you aren't vulnerable.
Yeah, and you wonder how long this has been out there. I don't know if they said it in the article, but they certainly show Shodan as having 3,000 servers on the internet. And I kind of look at libSSH as that smaller, more portable SSH library, and typically I come across it if I'm compiling a security tool or building a container for security tools, and I'm like, oh yeah, I need libSSH, because most of the programmatic ways you're interfacing with the SSH protocol, typically a developer is going to use libSSH, so I've had to include that and compile it, and I've done so just happily, not doing a code review every time I've done it, right? On the internet. And that's typically the use case, and the article does say it's using a lot of IoT devices, or like back in the day you were pointing out, April, appliances.
This is I mean, it's just bad coding. It's putting a lot of trust in user input that shouldn't be there, instead of double checking the user input or keeping the user input from saying certain things. Yeah, this could have been easily prevented.
Yeah, and I should correct, most of the client library is not affected. It's the server side. You have to be running a server that's based on the libSSH library, which makes more sense that it's in IoT devices. I think of it as a smaller, more portable library, and you could have it in places that you don't know of on your internal network if you're not looking. And that's my concern with the jQuery vulnerability and this vulnerability, is it represents that class of vulnerabilities that can be very difficult to identify in your internal network or in your own internal development processes.
Yeah, and the number of third-party apps and appliances and other things, network devices, everything that uses SSH could potentially be vulnerable. That's a lot of patching. This could take a long time to fix.
Yeah, I think we're fortunate in libSSH is unless you've changed the banner, I mean that's going to get you some level of visibility. Like the Shodan search shows that the SSH server was compiled with libSSH, but as I've seen in a lot of IoT hardware, oftentimes they're changing or obscuring the banner, so that's not a good test. And then the next way you figure that out is you go start exploiting it in your environment, and that's could be bad for a lot of reasons, is you could crash the service or crash the device. And then if it's successful, that's great. But if it fails, was it really vulnerable or not? Or did your exploit just not work on that platform, right? If the IoT device is an ARM-based device, but your exploit testing is x86 based, then your exploit's going to fail, but not because it wasn't vulnerable, just because your exploit didn't work.
And this is where a least privilege model is going to help too, because if you don't allow root logins, then that's going to limit your exposure. Well, that's going to limit your damage a little bit. If you have renamed root or not allowed logins, or you use certificates instead of passwords, I mean, some of these things are going to mitigate the destruction that this can cause.
Yep. Yeah, and I go back to, in both these cases, right, it being very difficult. If you're developing your own software internally and you've done the threat modeling and you've talked about the security of your project and you're all in agreement, and then you're off to give it to developers to go code something, and they look at the requirements, if they read the requirements, and interpret them correctly. That's a totally different discussion. But they're like, oh, I need to provide SSH in my application somewhere. So I'm not going to write the library myself because that would be silly. I'm going to go get the open source version and include it. If that's not in your threat modeling and not in your visibility of what programmers are including in their software, then you're at a significant disadvantage in your security architecture, in my opinion.
And we wouldn't necessarily want them to write their own SSH library, though. I mean, using the one that's had lots of people looking at it and fixing it and the open source, I think that's going to be a better library that you're going to, better piece of software that you're going to end up with in the end. But the whole point of including defense in depth is so that when something like this happens, you have other controls that are going to mitigate the damage that occurs, so that when the attack happens, when the worst happens, when SSH is vulnerable and just allowing people in, that there are other things in place, like having jump servers, things like that, having like just keeping things off of the internet when you're doing SSH.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, least privilege, and patching everything else as well, so that if they do get in, there's not a whole lot that they can do once they're on the system.
Yeah, what you're describing, I definitely am in tune with. It's more a holistic view of your security, right? And I think that the threat modeling has to take into consideration, like, okay, what if we're using a library and there's a heinous vulnerability in it? I think Heartbleed put that on everyone's radar, or at least it should have put that on everyone's radar, so that you have some process to, as April was saying, reduce your risk, but you also have some process to discover that more easily in your environment and work on remediating it across your code, right? And figuring out where all your instances of libSSH are can be daunting had you not created your SDLC to properly inventory everything that you're using on an ongoing basis. And if you're like, well, how do I accomplish that? Like, it's too late. Like, now you've got to back up and implement that. And of course, there's lots of solutions on the market today that can help with that. But I feel like that's not in a lot of people's planning for their developers today, which gets us talking about all the latest incidents, Equifax being one of them, about that there is risk introduced when you're incorporating these libraries, and it's about having a plan, I guess, to summarize that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that most developers are capable of telling you where in their code they use certain libraries, but they have to kind of forensically go back into their code and tell you that. It's not something that they have a list of, which is something they should have a list of as part of good SDLC hygiene. But It's tricky.
Yeah, because that, I mean, being hackers that we are, we're like, well, that's great. So you're monitoring your source code repository, and as developers are checking things in, there's a process that's making sure that there's no vulnerable libraries in there. But what about that other group that's using a different source control project? And are we monitoring them or not? I don't know. And that's, it's always those exceptions that get us in trouble in security-wise.
Or those legacy software pieces that somebody wrote and they don't work there anymore and nobody wants to touch it because it just works. Like, people don't even understand all the components. But that's never good.
Never good. Never good is people hacking into your pacemaker as well, which I thought this was kind of interesting. I don't know that it was necessarily a flaw in the software, but like basically it sounded like riding on the VPN connection that developers use to update the pacemaker software was more the case here.
Yeah, it said that it used a VPN to establish a connection, but once it checked for the update, it didn't check again to see if it was on the VPN before downloading it, which is kind of a weird vulnerability. But I mean, they mentioned that 8,000 vulnerabilities were discovered across 4 different pacemaker programmers, and that's just pacemaker programmers, which are the things that program pacemakers.
Yeah.
So imagine all of the other devices out there. I don't even understand why these need to be internet connected. Like, why do you need an internet connected pacemaker?
Yeah.
If the workaround is to have a representative come out with a USB and update your pacemaker, why isn't that just how it's done?
Right. But now do I have a USB port somewhere? I don't want to know where that USB port is. All right.
Well, that's the workaround. That's how they said that they're working on additional security updates that a Medtronic representative will manually update via a secured USB.
Yikes. And what's the supply chain look like? I mean, there's tons of ways you could potentially get around that. And of course, this has been popularized years ago in the TV show Homeland, I think, right? They attacked the vice president, right. In the pacemaker front. And of course, wireless connectivity is going to be sought after in this case, so that, again, I don't have some kind of external port on my body, right? But that, the authentication and authorization to that network, I think, is what the article was definitely bringing out that's in question, that they could have done a much better job in the name of patient safety.
I wouldn't want something that could be remotely accessed or updated remotely. Or I just want a pacemaker that works. I don't need a pacemaker that I can connect to from my phone. I don't need a pacemaker that my doctor can give me updates to it frequently. I just want something that works.
Right.
I don't think we're ready for connected medical implants that allow us to live. I don't think we're there yet.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. The state of IoT security, while there are some strides in ways that have been in methods that have improved the security of IoT devices, I certainly agree. Like, we're not there. I mean, we all kind of freaked out when like Apple Pay and Android Pay were released, but now we're talking about something that's inside your body that someone could hack. Like, that's a big leap.
Yeah, I wouldn't trust it. If I had the choice between connected and not connected, I know which I would choose, 100%.
Yeah, because in a payment scenario, the worst case is I gotta maybe get a new credit card, right? And the other one is like, I could die. I mean, those are two very, very different results, right?
Right. Yeah, and I mean, so there was another article that we had this week about what the FDA is doing about this, and they are taking some major strides to try to make the manufacturers and all the people involved with these types of devices more accountable. But yeah, I mean, I guess this has to happen in order for it to get better one day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, the 3-letter government agencies, that start with an F, I think I'm somewhat disappointed, and it doesn't inspire much confidence. I think that they've certainly done some good, don't get me wrong, and there's certainly, benefits to society to having, those regulatory bodies, certainly. But more often than not, I mean, you can point out some pretty glaring holes in their processes. Of course, the FDA isn't like, how did the FDA let it get to this point without more stringent regulations? Is one pretty glaring hole. Like, we're kind of operating after the fact, as April said, we're going to wait for people to die before we have regulations. Like, let's get ahead of that. And the FDA has done some good things within the hospital arena, but I don't know about you, April, but have you been getting a lot of spam calls to your mobile numbers? Has there been like an uptick in that? I feel like there's been an uptick in that recently.
I almost never get spam calls.
You're lucky. You'll have to share how you did that someday, soon, because I get a lot, and I know a lot of people here, and other people I talk to get a lot as well. And the FTC has put down some regulations, so they actually found that they were spoofing prepaid cell phone numbers in your area code and the 3-digit numbers that are after that, and that was a no-no, and they stopped those people. But I'm like, what else are you doing? Because like everyone's seen, except for April apparently, are seeing a huge uptick in this and putting software on their phones to help prevent against it. I mean, so much so that like I want multiple phones or a phone with multiple SIM cards, and just I'm gonna get a new number, and that's the one I give out to people, and then hopefully that doesn't get leaked out and get spam calls. Although I'm sure it will, because a lot of these are automated.
So I use Google Voice, and I don't know if they filter a lot of it out or something, but I mean, even on that number versus my mobile number, I almost never get spam calls.
You're lucky. You're lucky. You've probably been really good about not publishing your number too.
I have opted out of virtually everything that one can opt out of on the internet in terms of people search and things like that.
Yeah, I've done a poor job of that too. I know, like when you go to retail and you go buy something in the store, and they're like, "What's your phone number?" I'm like, "What? Like you ask me on a date? Like what? I'm buying something at a store. Like I'm buying a couple of tools at Home Depot. What do you need my phone number for?" And obviously that's contributed. I think they're selling those lists, is my guess.
So I have 2 numbers that I'll give out when asked, and I don't want to give out my number. One of them is it's like an app on my phone that gives me a burner number, and I can have multiple burner numbers, and then I can just destroy them when I'm done. There's also a phone number that you can either give to people or forward people. Once you're already on the phone, you like hang up, or you hit pound and then or flash, and you do some stuff. And I have instructions on my computer, nice. And it transfers them to basically they get rickrolled on the phone.
Oh, that's awesome!
Yeah,
I want that. That's clever. I definitely want to rickroll all those spam calls, and other people that just call me randomly too. I would just rickroll them just for fun. Not you, of course, April. I would never do that.
I'll have to tweet that out later.
Unless you did that to me first, and then we would just be in a rickroll battle. Like, no, I really need to talk to you. No, it's just too much fun. That can be too much fun. All right, so at that, I'm going to take a short break here. We don't have a formal guest for the show, so we're going to do stories, but we're going to take a short break now and come back and finish talking about some of the stories in the news, including, of course, Facebook, because we can't have a show without talking about Facebook. Stay tuned. Signal Sciences secures the most important web applications, APIs, and microservices of the world's leading companies, protecting over 7,500 applications and 150 billion production requests per week. Signal Sciences Next-Gen WAF and RASP help companies increase security and maintain site reliability without sacrificing velocity, all at the lowest total cost of ownership. Signal Sciences' patented technology protects any application against any attack, with integrations into any DevOps toolchain. Signal Sciences, demand more from your WAF. Learn more at signalsciences.com/PSW. Do you need a web application security solution that can improve your detection rate and enable easier remediation? Acunetics has a fully automated solution that can detect and report over 4,500 web vulnerabilities. Fast and scalable, it can scan thousands of pages without interruption, including HTML5, JavaScript, and single-page applications. Acunetics provides accuracy with the lowest false positives by combining black box and white box testing. For more information, visit acunetics.com/securityweekly. Hard-coded credentials can be trouble, but not as much trouble as a vulnerable DevOps environment. If you want protection without the hassle of security slowing you down, CyberArk, the #1 provider in privilege access security, has the solution for you. With CyberArk Conjur, developers can easily secure secrets across any DevOps toolchain or platform, whether your application runs in the cloud or on premises. Eliminate the headaches of managing secrets and try Conjur open source for free with no strings attached. Visit conjur.org/ASW to get started today. Welcome back, everyone, to Application Security Weekly. If you're interested in quality over quantity and having meaningful conversations instead of just a badge scan, join us. We'll be there, Security Weekly, on April 1st through the 3rd at Disney's Contemporary Resort for InfoSec World 2019. You can connect and network with like-minded individuals in search of actionable information. Use the registration code OS19-SECWEEK, SECWEEK. That gets you 15% off the main conference or a World Pass. Alrighty. Actually, and then there's one more announcement that I was supposed to read. Patrick Laverty, one of our illustrious co-hosts, is presenting pen testing tips, tricks, and stories with Aaron Herndon at B-Sides Connecticut 2018. We mistakenly said 2019 because we're doing 2019 planning, and we say 2019 sometimes when we mean 2018. B-Sides Connecticut 2018. The ticket sales are open now, and it's $20 if you go to bsidect.org. That's happening on Saturday, November 3rd, and is always a fun event. And April Wright is still with us. It's got us all thinking about how we can have SIP devices in our homes, but we're going to continue talking about application and application security. And Facebook is in the news, and as they usually are, and lately not in a very good light, which is interesting. And this week they're talking about their video conference portal, which more information about that. We covered this, I think, last week, but why would you trust Facebook now with I think they're starting to feel the pain of their abuse of the trust of their users, and they're trying to launch a new Facebook camera phone portal in-home thing, and no one trusts it, ironically enough. Do you have one of these devices, April, in your home?
No, I do not. And I probably will not. Between it talking back to Facebook and being integrated with Alexa, I'm out.
Yeah, I'm out. Yeah, I mean, just Facebook. I mean, I saw an article recently that Facebook was going to start acquiring security companies and had been in talks with several security companies. I'm curious to see when that actually announces. I mean, I'll see that when it announces. I actually subscribe to things that tell me when a security company gets acquired. So I'm interested to see which ones Facebook may acquire if that in fact happens. But, you know, April, you were pointing out during the break, like, it's not the fact that Facebook doesn't have security. It's all about the privacy and how they use your data.
Right. Since we are the product.
Mm-hmm.
So it's funny that the portal, as soon as I saw it, I immediately thought of this device that I used to have. It was the 3Com Audrey. And it was this little screen, and it had a little infrared keyboard, and it's supposed to sit in your kitchen. and or wherever, and it would integrate with your Palm Pilot. This was around like 2000.
Wow.
It would integrate with your Palm Pilot, and you could have it would update your calendar and your to-do list and your shopping list and all this other stuff. But it was like way ahead of its time. And this thing just totally immediately reminded me of it, except that it didn't really do video calling, but just the whole concept of this touchscreen device that was in part of your life now. Like, is this what we have to look forward to in the future?
Right. Clearly the future is here. I think we all kind of saw those things in sci-fi TV and movies. The video calling device was a very futuristic thing. What we maybe didn't think about is the privacy implications, and trust, which is a risk.
Yeah, and Amazon already did this with they had a very similar device for calling, and Alexa enabled, and they had all these commercials, like you give one to your grandmother or something, and then you have one at home, and the kids can talk, and it's supposed to be super easy.
Yeah, I have two of those devices, the Echo Show, and the calling feature is terrible. And the whole I had to turn it off because like it was like trying to sync my address book. And at one time, my son like made a call to someone in my address book, like through the thing. And I had to I was like, how did it get a hold of my address book? I had to go like couple rounds of turning stuff off to make it not do that, which was kind of scary. What I like about the Echo Shows is you can just tell it to play movies and stuff, and it'll do that, which is nice for the kids. But yeah, the calling feature is just horrible privacy and security, and I turned off all those features since then.
So this thing is funny. It's got it uses AI, but it doesn't do facial recognition. You can disable the camera. It comes with a camera cover. They try to make it seem like it's
like they care.
Private. Yeah, exactly. But then they're like kind of unsure. The VP in charge of Portal said that he doesn't know if ad targeting will be used or not. Like, how does he not know that?
Right. He just doesn't want to tell you. What I find interesting and somewhat scary, I mean, stuff that people know. I mean, people know I like kung fu movies, right? So the first thing I did with the Echo Show was I was like, play a kung fu movie. And initially it started playing Legendary Weapons of China, which is one of my favorite kung fu movies. I'm like, it knows me. I'm like, that's so creepy, actually, that it knows me in that way. I was kind of weirded out. But also happy that it was playing Legendary Weapons of China at the same time.
And I know a lot of people, myself included, have had weird experiences where you're just having a conversation, not even like offline, in a room with some device, your phone or something else, and you suddenly start seeing ads about it. I have opted out of all personalized ads that I possibly can. I don't know how this happens. It's terrifying.
It's interesting because, my friends get a hold of it and add various items of an adult nature to my shopping list, which then impacts the advertisements that I see. I also think that my purchase of the Tushy bidet just made like the AI and machine learning think things about me that necessarily aren't true. So I claim. So I saw some very interesting personal hygiene and adult personal items in my various advertisements, which was entertaining, actually. Things that I did not know existed. I was like, wow, that's a new one.
I think that's in the realm of adversarial inputs. I'm not really sure.
Yes,
I think there's a special category.
Like, they got me put into like, the bucket of this person really cares that his butt is clean kind of category, which is a scary category to be in. Just throwing that out there.
I mean, there are worse categories.
There are worse categories, right? I mean, it speaks to hygiene, which somehow segues into pleasure, I guess, for some. But yeah, it was very weird. And now no one believes me when I tell them that it was seeded in my. Yeah, no one believes me. So that stuff's crazy. Hackers are hiding cryptocurrency malware in Adobe Flash updates. I mean, that's no surprise. Are people still running Flash? I thought, is Flash really still a thing? I don't know.
It It is. This one. So it was it wasn't available from Adobe. It was a valid update that people would install, but they didn't get it from Adobe, and they don't know how people were getting it, which is kind of scary. It would be nice to know, was it coming from like Softopedia or one of those download sites? Was it coming from a website pop-up? They have no idea. So it would be nice to know what some of the vectors were, although we can probably guess.
Was this the one that it was a legit update and it actually installed the update, right? But it also installed malware. So you're patched, but you have malware.
Right. It's just a Trojan with crypto mining, crypto jacking in the background.
And it made sure that no one else could exploit your version of Adobe Flash unless they had a 0-day for the latest version of Flash, which, I mean, based on history, a lot of people probably have.
Yeah, and it was mining Monero, just like everything else seems to.
Pretty much.
It was going to a single wallet, which is a little weird, but I'm sure they were spreading that out over multiple, making it untraceable.
Yep. Apparently, the government's rolling out two-factor authentication for federal agency.gov domains. Kind of interesting.
Only for the administrators of the websites, not for everybody.
Oh, interesting.
So only for web administrators.
And I wonder what type of two-factor is. There's, I think, huge differences between SMS authenticator apps and a physical token.
They said it was Google Authenticator.
Gotcha. Which isn't bad. No. I mean, still, if someone gets your phone, and it's kind of cached in there, someone could get that, right? That's always my fear with Google Authenticator, is if I lose my phone, which tends to happen, thankfully not recently, but does tend to happen. If they can get into the phone somehow, they've got access to my Google Authenticator. I mean, unless you're putting two-factor authentication on your two-factor authentication, is it three-factor or four-factor at that? Anyway,
you can't triple stamp a double stamp.
It's true.
So I have two phones. I have an Android phone. I have an iOS. I've got tablets. I mean, you can put the app on multiple devices too, so that if you do lose one device, you still have the other ones to be able to get into it, which is my fear, which is why I try to keep them, at least one at home. It's like the designated survivor of two-factor.
Yeah, then of course you're limiting yourself if someone breaks into your home and steals your tablet just to get your two-factor. I mean, that's you're limiting your risk, certainly. I went to physical tokens for my two-factor to separate it from my phone, just because I'm awful with my phone, and I lose it a lot. And if my kids get a hold of it, my kids are hackers, and it could be bad. So I went to a physical factor. And recently I've been looking, I don't know if you've looked in this, April, but I'm looking at the phishing keys, and they're really cheap, and they're functional, right? You can get like a USB and with NFC for like $16 or $17, which is pretty good. But the problem is they're made in China. And I'm like, I don't know if I trust it now. Like I want to implement them, but I don't know if I trust it. Could they do some? I mean, they could theoretically, but I'm not, I need to research it more. Have you looked into that at all?
But everything else we buy is made there.
Yeah, it's true.
Not everything, but a lot of things. Our phones, our computers.
That's true. My phone's made in China primarily too. So yeah. Well, I mean, I'm just looking for excuses for me to buy a cheaper key so I can have multiple, one in the safe and one that I carry with me, at least two, right? Because then the problem becomes if you're traveling, like. Personally, people that I know in the security field that travel a lot are like, I can't have physical two-factor. They're like, because I'm traveling and it gets stolen or I lose it while I'm away, they're like, now I'm really screwed because like my backup is, somewhere else, which is bad.
Right. And does that have another factor on top? So you have the password and then you have the device. Is there also something else? Well, let's see, what am I asking? So if somebody found the device, wouldn't it be easier for them to use than if they found your phone? Because your phone has a password on it.
It's true.
So then they'd have to get through multiple layers to get to the two-factor app, and you may even have biometrics or something on that. So having it in your phone is probably more secure than just having it dangling from your keys.
It's true. It is. It's actually a really valid point. Because let's say I am traveling and someone steals my key. Now I don't have a key to get into whatever my Google account or my LastPass to invalidate the key that was stolen because I don't have another key. That was my issue when traveling. Because you heard the story about my bag. Yeah, my second factor was in that bag that got stolen. Yeah. Yeah. Hence my quest to find something better. I think I just need to get better at the Google Authenticator app and having that be more portable, because there's instructions to port that to different phones, which I sucked at apparently.
And I tried the Duo Authenticator, which is very similar to Google, but it's supposed to have a cloud component. And I never, I was hoping that if I restored on a different device, that it would have all of my things on it still, but I had to go back in and regenerate all of the codes, and rescan all the QR codes and everything. So I'm not really sure what the cloud component was supposed to do, or maybe it just failed for me.
Find that copy of those backup codes that you had for some of the services as well, which is scary. You're like, oh, I set that up like a year ago. I'm like, crap, where did I save those backup codes? In a really safe place, because the backup code is your second factor, right? Anyway, I don't know. I just like the physical token, but in any case. Learning and tools, there's a couple, you can embed Meterpreter and Android APKs. This is interesting, but also I think something that's pretty common in the Android world, right, is you can put APKs inside of APKs. Like, there's all kinds of ways to Trojan an APK, and one reason why Android is suffering on the security side, I think, is just because they've made it so easy to do evil things with the APKs.
Well, and that's one of the things people love about Android, and that's one of the things people hate about Android, is that it is a more open and free community, but you're giving up some safety. Just like anything where, like TSA, for example, you're giving up some freedom for safety.
Right. So in some cases, getting a free fondle too, which is, bonus.
But like with Apple apps, they're vetted, and they beat out Android in a lot of ways in terms of security, but in terms of functionality, I've got Kali installed on an Android device. Like, I could never do that with an iPad.
And what's interesting, and it sounds silly, but one of the reasons that I prefer Android is just simple things like I can change my default text messaging app. Like, you literally give up that level of control, unless they've changed it in iOS. But is that true in iOS? I don't really use iOS anymore, largely because I wanted the flexibility to do things like change my default application for text messaging.
So I don't use my carrier's text messaging anyway.
Yeah, I use Signal for my text messaging, but I can make Signal the default app for text messages on Android, whereas when I had iOS, I couldn't, unless they've changed it. But I can still use it, but it's not the default one. I'm just petty like that. So some scanners for looking for the libSSH vulnerability that we talked about earlier. Your mileage is going to vary. So, I worked in vulnerability management for quite some time. And, anytime there was a big vulnerability or even medium-sized vulnerability in terms of the ubiquitous nature of the vulnerability, someone or more than one person would put together some kind of one-off scanner, and your mileage is going to vary, right? Typically, when those are first released, their accuracy is questionable at best. As people use them, if they're open source, which typically they are, they get a little better over time. But I always felt that what was available commercially actually was somewhat better. And a lot of that is due to the size of the customer base and the feedback. In other words, when one of the big vulnerability management companies puts out a plugin, says, hey, you can check for this, they've got thousands of customers that are scanning ridiculously huge networks in a lot of cases, And so if it needs to be tweaked and there's a team of developers behind it, it happens pretty instantly. When you've got like a free script, like in this libssh example, it doesn't have that infrastructure behind it. So they tend not to be as accurate, but are a good way to start testing things out in your lab. I would hesitate to recommend you unleash that on your production network, especially without testing it first. But the other thing is some of those free things may come to be available quicker than some of the other updates as well. And that's just, do you want speed or reliability? And there's a balance between the two.
I think this SSH vulnerability is going to be around for a long time. So this will probably end up in the arsenal of pen testers everywhere.
Yep. Agreed.
Or some variant of it.
Yeah, as well as RDP testing. As apparently RDP is still like a thing. I remember coming across it when I worked at the university, and it had some vulnerability at the time, if not configured a certain way, I think was the case. Like basically I could sniff the credentials in clear text. And that was the way it was. I'm talking like back in 2001, right? And no one wanted to change. And so I set up a little example and I sniffed the credentials, and they were like, oh my God, that's horrible. We didn't realize how much risk that posed, and switched to something else. And I thought Microsoft did a better job with RDP, but apparently people just expose it to the internet, which is bad.
Well, at least it's got some encryption, and this tool supports the encryption, whereas some of the previous man-in-the-middle tools were really just trying to get RDP to downgrade.
Yeah, exactly. And food for thought. There's a cybersecurity hiring gap. This one's kind of interesting. Most people will point out the fact that there's not enough cybersecurity professionals. Some will point out that people are just hiring for the wrong things, that you're never going to find your ideal candidate with, the requirements that you put out are just unreasonable, and therefore we have a shortage because of the way we're trying to hire. I think there's, some of both going on. Your thoughts, April?
I thought that this was full of some really good ideas, both for job seekers and for hiring managers and HR and things like that. Just in terms of how to word a question, rather than saying, do you have a degree? What is your view of the world? Like, that's like a total turnaround from what we've been asking before. Instead of asking somebody if they can program, say, show me some code. Looking at the body of work that somebody has created on their GitHub or whatever, rather than requiring them to have 3 to 5 years of experience.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And, I was talking about it. I did an interview with another show that will be, I'll promote it on our shows. And I remember my first job as a programmer when I was still in college. Like, I had to whiteboard out code. And, they just asked me, like, how much experience do you have coding? And I said, well, I took classes when I was 7 and stuff. And they were like, all right, show us on the whiteboard. And that was pretty nerve-wracking, but a way more accurate thing than just saying you need 3 to 5 years experience as a developer, right? So I like that level of, interviewing and finding potential candidates, for sure.
Totally. And I mean, any of today's modern candidates are updating their resume for every job they apply to anyway, whether it's for keyword searching within the HR databases of resumes, or if it's because if they don't see the exact wording on your resume that it says in the job description, they won't even look at you.
Wow.
So people are actually tailoring their resumes and trying to make it look like they're more tuned to the job than if they just had a single resume like people used to do.
And along the same lines, Disney is helping women become coders. It's actually something. Go ahead, April.
This is awesome. I think this is so cool. It was a really, really tough program to get into, but it's taking people that don't code, don't have any IT background, and just giving them training and support on the job to be able to get into coding. They're given mentors from within the existing IT organization. They are, and they're actually allowed to go back to their old jobs if they don't like it. I mean, this is like a model that if they could produce some sort of documentation about how they did this and share it with the world, this would be just incredible for companies to provide new career paths for people.
Yeah, it's interesting in somewhat ironic is I talked about this in my and I'm not sure if they mention it in this article, but I talked about it in my DerbyCon talk. And they actually don't mention this article, but it's really ironic because the name of the project is called Alice. You can get it at alice.org, and it's based on research. If you read the last lecture with Randy, it's one of his students, computer science students, that did this research project that basically said that females, in particular, their study was with teenage girls, learn programming much more quickly and adopt to it much better if they're allowed to tell a story with it. So when the learning of the programming is set in the context of telling a story and storytelling, they found that there was a much higher adoption in women. Which is really interesting to think about. And like, there's a whole research paper that I linked to. They're like, if you don't believe me, like, this is legit research. And it's the kind of the basis for founding the Alice.org project, which is an entire programming language geared towards helping people learn programming similar to Scratch and Tinker. So I thought that was really cool. I don't know if you've seen the Alice.org. If you haven't, April, I'm curious for you to check it out and give me your thoughts.
Yeah, I want to check it out. That sounds really interesting. I would worry, knowing nothing about it, I would worry that that it would maybe only serve, if it was a totally separate programming language than what everybody else was using, it might serve as some sort of a delineation between things. But yeah, I mean, anything that gets more diverse people into tech and keeps them there, I'm for.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Awesome. Well, April, thank you so much for appearing on this episode of Application Security Weekly. Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching. And as Keith would say, make sure you git commit and stay classy.